This podcast is brought to you by LMU Munich.
Thank you everybody for coming. Thank you everyone for the introduction. My name is Markus Holtermann. I'm a Django core developer for almost 2 years now. I joined in 2015 after contributing to most migrations in 2014 and then becoming the contributor with apparently the most commits, or non-core contributor with the most commits in 2014. And yeah, that boils down to commit it yourself. Today I work as a software engineer at LaterPay, a Munich-based company where we do micropayment and for online or for digital goods. And we try to do it in a smarter and more convenient way where you, like, similar to when you go in a restaurant, you order first, you consume your food, and then you leave the restaurant with paying at a later stage. SSL, all the things. A couple of years ago, I'm actually not sure, was 2013 when Snowden revealed all the secret information about NSA and everybody was, oh man, this is scary. We learned that there's a lot out there, a lot of people, a lot of organizations that collect a lot of data about us. And one of the things we want to make sure these days is to have them not collect that much information about us as back then. At least that's the perception over here in Germany, a lot of European countries, some countries around the globe as well, but there's also, of course, some that where privacy is still, yeah, we don't care. There's also, for example, public Wi-Fi. So consider the eDORM here, which is luckily encrypted and hopefully secure in the sense that when you talk to the Wi-Fi, use the Wi-Fi, nobody who can actually listen in on this communication between your phone or your laptop and the Wi-Fi hotspot. But think about a cafe where you drink your coffee and take out your laptop and this is an open Wi-Fi. Everybody would be able to listen in on those connections. And you don't really want that. So you want to have something in there that makes sure your connection is secure. Think about some news pages where service providers in between inject advertisements where the original author of this page doesn't even intend it for adverts to be in this page. And you as a user suddenly see ads, which is surprising. This is a bad idea from both a user perspective or from a user's accessibility perspective, but also from a security perspective, because people in the chain of connections in between can modify content and can control what you see. And you don't want that. So this is where encryption and SSL comes into play. But first, let me give you a short disclaimer. I'm not a cryptographer. All the examples I give here are either to the best of my knowledge or to the best of the knowledge of people I talk to and I trust, which still does mean there could be errors. If you spot them, please talk to me so I can correct them before I put the slides online. Also, this talk does not cover everything about SSL, TLS that's out there, because that's too much. And that would probably fit the entire conference. And I'm not sure I want to talk for an entire conference. SSL 2 and 3 are broken. If you ever see that in the wild, please know. Or if you are the person who potentially uses that, please don't. There are reasons for that. TLS 1.0, 1.1 are deprecated, discouraged to be used. They are probably still more secure than SSL 2 and 3. If you don't have to use them for old legacy systems, then don't. If you can use TLS 1.2, that's better for you and for everybody's sake. And just to give you a brief look into the future, Google cryptographers came up with an algorithm for post-quantum cryptography, and like the Star Wars movie, they called it New Hope. Well, cryptography and security, yeah, let's hope for the best. SSL, TLS, what's that anyway? After all, these are just a couple of abbreviations, and the first one stands for Secure Socket Layer, the second one for Transport Layer Security. And they are essentially cryptographic protocols for communication, most notably in networks. So HTTP, IMAP, or POP3, and this stuff. Either provides 2 out of 3 parts of information security, which is the confidentiality, which is ensured by cryptographically encrypting the content that you transfer. So nobody from the outside can understand what you transmit. The second one is integrity, which means nobody can inject things into their communication and potentially compromise whatever you transfer. The third part in information security is availability, which you need to treat on a different layer, which is not possible to cover with TLS or SSL. And, well, now let's go about this thing that's been in the news over the last couple of years, which is called Let's Encrypt. Who of you has heard about Let's Encrypt? That's more than half the room. That's good. So Let's Encrypt essentially provides you with free SSL certificates. You used to pay lots of money to get SSL working, well, get the certificates, and then probably even more work or more money to get it working. And the idea of Let's Encrypt is to make that process easy and reliable and just painless to use. And they're in a pretty good way there. But in order to understand how Let's Encrypt works and to then go on with the talk, you need to understand how SSL or the entire certificate stuff works. Let's have a look at this diagram. I understand that might be slightly complex, but it's, in the end, really easy to understand. You have those called root certificate authorities. These are embedded in your browser, mail program, or whatever. And they essentially mean everything that those organizations or those certificates sign is trusted by your browser. Now, those certificates normally sign their own, or those organizations sign their own intermediate certificates, which are then used to sign your certificate. And because you have a chain of trust here, your browser essentially trusts those certificates at the bottom. Now let's look at the right. We have the same chain of trust here, but we have this root CA3 over here, which is not in your trust store. This is a problem because now everything that's signed with those certificates, or those certificates here, are not necessarily trusted by your browser because this root CA is not in your browser. So in order to accommodate that, some other root CAs can sign this intermediate certificate. And because this intermediate certificate belongs to this root can use this one to sign whatever certificates and is trusted on behalf of the other one. And this is essentially the position that Let's Encrypt is in right now. Except for, I think, Safari included that in the recent release, which is a pretty big step. Mozilla is going to include it in Firefox 50, which is, I believe, the next version. Chrome is coming as well. I'm not sure on the timeline there. But essentially, Let's Encrypt is going to move from there into the trust store up here, which makes the entire process even less annoying. Now, again, what's Let's Encrypt? Well, it provides you with a way to get those certificates, and that in a fairly easy way, or fairly reliable and fairly painless way. But in order to figure out how to do that, you need a couple of things. And you start off with a so-called account key. This key identifies you or as a person, organization, towards Let's Encrypt. Hi, I'm here, I'm Markus, and everything I do is under my name. Whenever I use this key to sign something, this is me. And you need a so-called certificate key, which is just a normal key you need all the time when you do SSL, which belongs to the cryptographic part for the signing or for the cryptographic communication at the end. And then last thing you need is the so-called certificate signing request, which essentially is a cryptographic signed document that you send to Let's Encrypt. Here, please, can you sign this set of domains for me? and give me the certificate for that. Now, given those three pieces of information, you can use Let's Encrypt. And this process looks scary, but it actually is not. It's fairly logical. You essentially start off with, here's my account key, I'm here now. That's the first step over here. The next step, the certificate signing request, means Let's Encrypt, here's my certificate signing request, can you please sign these certificates for me? And what Let's Encrypt is going to do is, well, hang on a second. How do I know that the domains you have in this signing request are actually yours? Please answer a couple of questions or challenges for me. And what they do, they provide you with a challenge and then request those challenges for every single domain you have in the signing request. So when you own example.com and example.de and example.net, they send you this challenge and you're supposed to put this challenge in certain places. I have a slide for that later. And they're going to request these challenges or the answers to these challenges from your web server, from this domain. If you can provide that, great. We trust you that you were able to, put this content on this site, and that's good enough for us. If you can't, now we don't trust you enough to give you this certificate or to issue the certificate for you, so go away. Given that all the challenges passed, you can then retrieve the certificate from Let's Encrypt, which is the last step here. And then you have the certificate and can put it wherever you need it. So, given this process, you don't really want to do that manually. There's a bunch of signing involved cryptographic algorithms, and you don't want to do crypto yourself. So let's use some clients to do that for us. Great, Let's Encrypt, being open, being public, they have an open source project, which is great if you don't want to do anything yourself. It does all the things. It does all the magic. It modifies your Apache config, it restarts Apache, it does all the magic. I think they're working on an Nginx integration and it will do all the magic there as well. That's great, but not necessarily the right approach from my perspective. Certificate management is one thing. Configuring your web server, restarting your web server is something entirely different, and I don't want this service to do that for me. So how are you supposed to use that? Well, there are a couple of clients out there that just do this certificate exchange or certificate retrieval process. One of them is the ACME Tiny project, which is also the one we use at djangoproject.com, which works really well. It's 200 lines of Python code. It's really understandable. If you think about using Let's Encrypt, have a look at this script. It goes exactly through this process. It's understandable. It's nice to review. It's nice to understand how Let's Encrypt, or the essential part of Let's Encrypt works. There are a bunch of other things. For example, there's a tool from Alex Gaynor, which is Let's Encrypt AWS, which puts all the magic into the AWS, uses the AWS IAM, I think, for managing for putting the certificates there that you can then use in whatever service you have. Amber Brown has a tool called rproxy, which does also kind of which does the certificate exchange, but also acts as a reverse proxy itself. That's quite convenient to use as well. Now, I mentioned you need to put these challenges in some place. I hope you can read it in the last row. Essentially, they're going to request domain/.wellknown/acme-challenge and then some arbitrary file name. And as long as you are able to provide the file under that URL, you'll be good. So you can have a server that does all the Let's Encrypt termination and have the certificates somewhere else where you actually need them. The key thing here is you need to do this over port 80 because, well, you don't have an SSL certificate yet. So this is kind of a hen-egg problem. And now this is a bunch of lines of code, but essentially this is using the ACME client, ACME tiny client. You put in your account key, the signing request, the place where to put the challenges, where you want to have the certificate written to, and if you want to combine it with these intermediate certificates, because this is what most web servers want these days. Issuing this command every 60 days, or almost 90 days, these certificates by Let's Encrypt are valid for 90 days, you will have a fresh certificate every time. So put this in cron and you're done. Well, you need to restart your web server, but these are the other parts. Now, how do you use SSL in Python? That's the fun part. And let's look at the server code. No, that's the client code, sorry. You open a socket, and then you create some SSL context, which is the Python way of how to do SSL. You need to create a bunch of settings, configuration options. You put all of those into the context. And then, well, let's disable TLS v1 and v1.1 because, well, that's too old for us. In a fairly recent Python versions, even 2.7 something, this TLS or SSL 2 and 3 are not there anymore anyway. And then, well, you connect to your host and do whatever you want to do with this connection. The server side is slightly more code, but the essential parts here are, again, we don't probably want TLS 1 and 1.1, and we want to load the certificate over here. The next part, or last part that's important, is that you have some kind of cipher string. This essentially defines for the underlying SSL implementation, which is most likely OpenSSL or Derivate, only use these cryptographic algorithms, protocols, because every else is not secure enough for you. I didn't come up with this string myself. This is one of those talk to people know where to look for figuring out how to do it right. I have the link for that later. Well, and then you accept connections and do the regular network communication stuff you have in Python, in low-level Python, and you're good. Now, what I didn't cover, but I want to talk about, because this is, well, there's a bunch of things there. Certificate revocation. So you get these nice certificates. They have a validity of 90 days. Great, but oh shit, this was compromised because something happened. You can use the ACME process, so the Let's Encrypt process, to revoke the certificate. Great, this is what you need. Shit, I lost my account key. My account key was compromised. Well, given your account key, you can pretty much do whatever you want. Let's issue a new one and tell Let's Encrypt, please don't trust the old one anymore. Please use this one now. If you use HTTP, HTTPS, you might want to ensure that you only use HTTPS and not HTTP, because that potentially leaks information you don't want to have leaked. And if you use HTTPS, you might even want to think about HSTS, which is HTTP strict transport security, which means your browser is never going to request anything from HTTP anymore from this domain. So this, even if you type http://example.com, your browser, before it does even the first request, will translate that to HTTPS, which is nice. But which might break your site if you then at some point decide to not have HTTPS anymore. Yeah, there are downsides everywhere. As shown here in the example before, you can use that for pretty much everything you want. The only thing you need to ensure is when you exchange the certificate, you have to have port 80 on this domain, and you're good. You can then use this certificate and run on whatever service you have. So, for example, I run my IRC bouncer program with Let's Encrypt certificate. And here a list of things that can go wrong because cryptography and pain all the way. HSTS, as mentioned, or HPKP, the public key pinning, this is something that's, yeah, you might want to look into, you might want to have, but please read up of the downside and of the problems you run into if you use that and if you decide to not have that anymore. Leaked keys, as mentioned, you want to have a process to follow when you leak a key, because that's a bad thing, because then people can do whatever they want in your name, and you don't want that. People claim SSL uses too much resources. 5 years ago, maybe? 10 years ago, probably. These days, I don't see any downside of using SSL, to be honest. There's no point in having that. Everything, all the hardware we have these days is probably even has the underlying cryptographic algorithms embedded in your hardware itself. So there's no software part involved in that part. And then looking at certain issues over the last month or so, October 13th, this was where GlobalSign messed up all their revocation process. They had a process. They apparently, I think, tried to follow, but didn't, and half the internet was offline. Because in SSL, all the certificates were signed by some GlobalSign certificates timed out. Then yesterday, day before yesterday, URLib3, a well-to-use package, got a security release. Please read this. If you use URLib3, please update. You're not checking your validity of your SSL certificates if you use the new open URLib version. And then, yeah, look at the release list of OpenSSL, and there's madness all the way. This is a list of resources. The example code is in this gist. The post-quantum cryptographic algorithm, and yeah, a couple of other things you might want to look into. Thank you.
Markus, thank you very much for your interesting talk. We have time for a few questions.
Do you know whether Encrypt is going to support wildcard certificates anytime soon? Not. So does Encrypt support wildcard certificates at any time soon? I don't know. They have issued, I think, 10 million active certificates by now. None of them wildcards. Having wildcard certificates is not necessarily easy to do with the current authentication process or verification process of the domains, because it requests every single domain, including subdomains. And having wildcard in there means you could then, depending on the domain, get wildcards where you don't own the subdomains. So probably not.
You can specify a list of alternate domains.
Yes.
That is a workaround for wildcard domain. Don't
Yes.
really want hundreds.
Yeah.
Question over there.
Do they have a process for saying something like, I've seen this certificate in the wild that claims to be a certificate from my website, but it is not a certificate from my website, and I own the website?
Do they have certificate notification for potentially leaked certificates?
No, so from the way I understand, you cannot do this challenge mechanism. And so let's say I've poisoned their DNS cache and whatever, and I've somehow managed to get the challenge done and get a certificate, but I really don't own the domain. And the domain owner then sees the certificate in the wild and wants to say, yeah, well, I own that domain and I don't have that certificate.
I don't think they have anything for that right now. I'm not sure if they're planning. It might correlate to the requirements for publicly announcing SSL certificates in the future. No, I don't have this link. I do have this. The last link, it goes into the SSL certificate logging, which Chromium requires sometime 2017 to, I think, counter one of those attacks.
The announcement list that says, I'm going to make this certificate valid at that.
Yes.
One last question over there, please.
Then let's go for the next question, please.
Yeah.
Over there.
I forgot my question.
Then let's have the remark.
I think
Is this a question? Otherwise, please the question up there. Thank you.
So, with the renewal process, do you see any benefit of issuing a new SSL private key every 90 days, or would you keep the key constant and just reissue the certificate?
There are certain, of course, when you reissue the key every single time, the potential of leaking a key is reduced, so you can you are less likely to being affected by attacks. The question is if this is. I think it's a matter of what's the process of generating the key, how expensive is this in your organization, in how you or where you do that, and then it's probably comes down to the to threat analysis and threat model that you want to follow.
So, thank you very much.